What's good? It's Woog. David Benavidez is a bad boy, isn't he? To put it in the words of Andrade, David Benavidez stopped Demetrius Andrade in 6 rounds. My goodness. Yeah, this wasn't a David Benavidez catch up to him late and get a late finish on Andrade and David Benavidez having to rally back and Andrade taking a lot of the early to middle rounds and looking good in the first half and fading in the second half. When things started to go in Benavidez's direction, they started to happen fast, man. Sheesh. And after the 6th round, Demetrius Andrade's corner stopped the fight. And thank God they did. It got really bad really quickly. The suddenness of the impact of the things that Benavidez was looking to do. Like, we saw what Andrade was looking to do. And I did think that you could give Andrade 2 of the first 3 rounds. Like the first round, you could shade it towards Andrade. Second round, I thought maybe David Benavidez won that one. And then the third round, I thought that Andrade won the round. I mean, Andrade won like the first minute and a half, close to 2 minutes of that third round. But there was that rally, that moment, that several seconds towards the end of the third round where, David Benavidez almost stole that round. So even though Demetrius Andrade won most of the third round, the parts that David Benavidez won were so much more meaningful. And, we discussed this. What was Demetrius Andrade going to have to do to really be competitive and to have a chance of winning this one? He was going to have to, 1, get David Benavidez's respect. Did he do that? Not really. He was doing some good work. You saw what he was trying to do in there, and he did hit Benavidez, but at a point, it kind of seemed like, if you're like, kind of play fighting your nephew or a kid or something. And all respect to Andrade, he was throwing his punches, but in terms of the impact that they were lacking on David Benavidez, it just seemed very apparent to where even if you were to shade around towards Andrade, you see the punches that Andrade is looking to land. You see his movement, how much he's exerting himself, how much he looks like he's throwing into some of these punches that some are landing, some are not. But Demetrius Andrade in the first couple of rounds looked like he was doing some things really, really well and having some success. But even when Benavidez would answer with just a couple punches, say when Benavidez starts to jab and then throw that right hand to the body, like a lot of people were talking about David Benavidez's left hand, which, yeah, he's got a monstrous left hand, a sweeping left hook, a nice pummeling jab. He could do some things with the left, certainly. But let's give it up for David Benavidez's right hand, because it was that right hand to the body that looked like it was almost instantly slowing Demetrius Andrade down. And it would often be at the end of an exchange or something where you see how Demetrius Andrade is trying to circle to keep the fight near the center of the ring. He'll even step forward and get into the trenches for a bit, maybe even too long, because, in tight quarters is when David Benavidez is also throwing those uppercuts, short hooks. He's shortening his punches. So once things started getting bad for Demetrius Andrade, they just seemed to be getting bad super quickly, where it looked like there was no place for reprieve, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. So we saw that right hand having that impact where it looked like Demetrius Andrade's movement started becoming more labored, where that step back, that it was a little bit slower. His lateral or reverse pivot steps to the side to circle back towards the middle of the ring seemed like they were just slower, to where he was easier to catch up to. So at that point, it just becomes a question number 2. Can you then stand your ground? Well, we saw Demetrius Andrade try to stand his ground. And again, to his credit, he was landing some punches, even some punches up the middle that were kind of popping Benavidez's head back. And Andrade was going to the body too. But if Andrade was already having to stand his ground, like in the 3rd and 4th round, that's a bad sign for Demetrius Andrade, man. Because another one of the questions was, how many of the early rounds can Demetrius Andrade bank to where when the tide starts to turn, because I felt like we all pretty much felt like the tide was going to turn at a point. Was it going to be like 7 rounds into the fight? Was it going to be 8 rounds into the fight? Was Demetrius Andrade going to be able to win like 5 of the first 8 rounds to where it's 5-3 after 8? Was Demetrius Andrade going to be able to win like 3 of the first 4 rounds to where after 4 rounds it's 3-1, or after 6 rounds it's 4-2, and Andrade is still looking viable movement-wise, energy-wise. He's not looking too spent after 6 rounds, and maybe he's up 4-2. At what point was the tide going to turn? Well, it turns out the tide, you could say, either turned in the 4th round, which resulted in that late round knockdown of Demetrius Andrade, which we're going to get into, or you could say that the tide turned as early as the 3rd round, where you saw David Benavidez really start to take control in that pocket of like 30 or so seconds towards the end of the 3rd round. But even in the first 2 rounds, again, as Andrade was having success and looking strong, like he was kind of coming forward. He wasn't like just moving a ton, trying to be evasive. No, when he was committing to punches, he was coming in, and he was coming in for blood. But the moments, even in those earliest 2 rounds that Benavidez was having, seemed a lot more significant. You quickly saw like the wear on Andrade's face. You saw his body language. You saw, as I said in the beginning of the video, his just like looking very physically stressed in there. And I felt kind of bad for Andrade too, just because of the career arc and the career story. And, you know, just the at 35 years old, still never fought like an elite, like top tier opponent, not having a signature win in your whole career. You finally get the opportunity, and it just ends up being a be careful what you ask for proposition, because you know, you're up a division, you're 35 against this young monster in his prime. Like, this was not like a Demetrius Andrade versus Jamal Charlo opportunity, or versus Jaime Munguia versus Billy Joe Saunders versus Canelo Alvarez. This was like none of that. This was the guy who nobody really wants to get in there with right now, man. Like, David Benavidez is looking like an absolute problem. And yes, he is still a little rough around the edges, but those edges are smoothing out. He has improved a lot in the sweet science department. And, you know, he mentioned after the fight, in the post-fight interview, I mean, give him some credit for his defense, because even when he's getting popped, he's kind of getting popped sometimes as he's moving back, or he's got a high guard where he's picking some of the punches off. But man, there was just a sustained pressure. And, you know, yes, I picked Benavidez to win, but I thought it was going to win. He was going to win probably via decision. If he was going to stop Andrade, it was going to be late. I didn't see it unraveling for Andrade this quickly. 6 rounds is all that Benavidez needed. And again, the writing was on the wall in the 3rd and 4th round. And like I mentioned, as Benavidez was depositing to the body early in those first couple rounds, and then it really starting to show its wear towards the end of the 3rd round, the knockdown is largely predicated on that work that Benavidez was doing to the body, because he was relentlessly throwing that right hand, not repeatedly, but some well-placed, well-timed right hands to the body. Well, in that one moment, he kind of feints, he hesitates, and then he throws a right hand. Andrade looks like he kind of thinks it's coming to the body, or he's not really sure, because, you know, his hands were up, but they weren't up high enough, and he still got caught super flush. And it took him like a half a second to go down, because he tried to come in and hold, but his legs were just not under him. And then he topples over, kind of falls forward, not face plants, but his legs were just too weak to sustain him at that time. And while he's trying to hold, falls forward. His weight just carries him forward. But yeah, there were investments made before that knockdown punch in the 4th round. But it wasn't just the right hand to the body and then bringing that right hand up top. It was, again, Benavidez able to shorten his punches, able to just stick that jab out and to start walking Andrade down to where, I mean, man, Benavidez looked huge in there too. And Andrade looked like he was trying to move, but it just takes like 1 or 2 steps at good angles for Benavidez to then close the distance, cut the ring off. And that's another thing that he's improved on, is cutting the ring off. He wasn't following Demetrius Andrade around the ring. No, he was taking the right steps that he needed to take to make Demetrius Andrade's 2 or 3 steps in whatever direction he's moving, circularly or laterally or moving back, but to effectively cut the ring off, so that even when you're not in the moment of throwing punches, you are applying this mental pressure. And even that goes a long way. But yeah, hats off to David Benavidez, looking absolutely relentless. I think that this is probably, you know, the Caleb Plant win was very impressive, but to stop Demetrius Andrade, who, you know, we didn't know what he's got at 168, at 35, then going up a division, having 1 fight against Damon Nicholson. We didn't know what Andrade, what he can do at 168, although he was seen to be a big middleweight, not a devastating puncher, but a physically big middleweight to where it seemed like it could make sense for him to go up to 168 and be okay. But like David Benavidez is a whole other can of worms. I mean, maybe Andrade can have 168 success against some of the other good fighters at 168, but Benavidez just ain't the one. And I don't know how long he's going to be able to make 168 for, but there's really no other business to be had at 168 at the very top besides Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. I mean, this is as clear as that picture gets. David Benavidez has done his part. I mean, he was already a two-time WBC champion. He's now still the WBC interim super middleweight champion. And now he's got signature wins against, Anthony Durrell earlier in his career, but now Caleb Plant, and he stopped Demetrius Andrade, handing him his first loss and, again, stopping him within 6 rounds. Andrade's got craft. He's got heart. But again, just the avalanche of activity. Once things start going bad for a Benavidez opponent, they start getting really bad because the way that he starts putting his punches together in combination and knowing which punches to throw and when to throw them, like there's something to be said about sticking Andrade with the jab, hurting him with the right hand downstairs to the body, shortening your hooks when he starts coming in tight, and then when he starts really coming in tight and looking to hold or looking to mix it up on the inside, throwing those uppercuts. Excellent punch placement, excellent punch selection, excellent style of pressure. I really don't have too much to dissect beyond that. David Benavidez is not the same fighter he was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. He's still improving. He's 26 years old. And again, the fight that needs to happen is Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. I don't know what other wiggle room Canelo's going to have. Is he going to generate a fight with Dimitri Bivol, who's, got a fight in December against Lyndon Arthur? So, okay, at least for the immediate future. And what we really want, especially now that the Saudis are involved, we want the Saudis to somehow bring us, whether it's on an undercard or whatever, please bring us Artur Beterbiev versus Dimitri Bivol. Whether or not the WBC belt is also up for grabs or whatever, we just want to see those two guys get in there because the clock is ticking, especially on Artur Beterbiev. And if anybody could make that fight happen, it's the Saudis. So I'm hoping that Canelo doesn't pivot to make a fight with Dimitri Bivol at this time. Even the Terrence Crawford fight, I'm not even sure I want to see that fight. I mean, yes, there is intrigue because of how good Terrence Crawford is and how great he looked against Errol Spence Jr. But I mean, the fight that needs to happen is Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. Look, Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence are also supposed to have that rematch. And look, we don't even know where the PBC action is going to be taking place in 2024. There are some things that still need to get sorted out. But in terms of how the timeline works, and look, they haven't scheduled Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. 2 yet. So I'm assuming it's going to be like first quarter 2024, maybe March or something. I don't know. But that should at least make a potential Canelo versus Terrence Crawford fight non-viable for May, because that's the weekend that you're going to be going for. It just lines up perfectly. I mean, I even heard Jaime Munguia being tossed around as a Canelo opponent. Get out of here. You mean to tell me you're going to give Oscar a call and do business with him to try to make a Canelo versus Munguia fight while you're already with PBC on this 3-fight deal? And you've got David Benavidez on the same promotion who's coming off of wins against Caleb Plant and Demetrius Andrade. One guy who you fought and beat to become undisputed via late stoppage, and Caleb Plant had some early round success against Canelo. And then the other guy, somebody who has been trying to fight you for like the past 10 years, David Benavidez just got in there with him and stopped him in 6 rounds. Everything just lines up to where the only fight for Canelo that really makes sense is David Benavidez. The fight world wants it. The fans want it. Anybody who's talking boxing and knows boxing wants it. And everybody knows that this is the fight that needs to happen. And David Benavidez is Canelo's WBC mandatory. There's no reason not to make this fight happen in May. If it doesn't happen, it's simply because Canelo did not want it to happen. He's the power player in the situation. He's the breadwinner. He's the power broker. He's the one who's got the gravitational pull, who makes a decision and then all other fighters then make their plans because Canelo just made his plan. But the work that David Benavidez has done up to this point now to earn that fight against Canelo, it's undeniable. So let's see what happens next. But I'm hoping for Canelo versus David Benavidez in May, period. Again, I thought David Benavidez was probably going to beat Andrade. I thought Andrade was going to be way more competitive for much longer, but he simply could not deal with the Mexican monster, David Benavidez, man. Like, again, we'll see where Andrade goes from here. I mean, there still are big fights to be had, good fights to be had. Hopefully he at least gained, some respect from the naysayers and the people who, for whatever reason, didn't like Andrade. Look, I never looked at Andrade's not fighting elite fighters as being mostly his fault. There were a couple of instances where it was Andrade's fault. One of them more recently against Janibek, who at the time wasn't a name. He was just a high quality unknown who was becoming a mandatory and a name that was just starting to buzz among boxing hardcores. But to be frank, I could understand why Andrade at that time, after having, one mandatory defense after another and still not drawing in any big names, why he wouldn't want to fight Janibek. I get that one. And then he pulled out of the Zach Parker fight. That one was due to injury. So those two, okay, yeah, Andrade is culpable for not fighting Janibek and for not fighting Zach Parker. But he was trying to fight Jermall Charlo, Jaime Munguia. Jaime Munguia was his mandatory, and Jaime Munguia didn't want the title shot. Like, Andrade had a fight scheduled with Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders tests positive, cancels Andrade's big fight, basically. And then Billy Joe Saunders is rewarded on the other end of that with a fight against Canelo. Like, a lot of things have happened in Andrade's career that don't feel fair. And it's just unfortunate for him that in his moment, in his time to shine, this happened to him. But yeah, it is what it is in the fight game. And I mean, we'll see where things go from here. But for David Benavidez, it needs to be Canelo versus David Benavidez. Let me know your thoughts on this fight. I didn't love Andrade's comments at the end. I felt like he somewhat discredited David Benavidez by saying he's not necessarily a good fighter or better than me skill-wise, even though you could argue maybe and maybe not. I don't know. We just saw what happened when both y'all were in the ring. But yeah, David Benavidez is the bigger fighter, but is Demetrius Andrade going to start campaigning at middleweight and saying, hey, I'm a smaller guy. It just is what it is. And then you keep fighting there? Because if he keeps campaigning at 168, then I don't know. It just sounded like when he kept on referring to David Benavidez as just being big. He's just big. He's big and strong. He didn't say, he sounded like he was discounting the skill and basically just saying, yeah, it was the physicality and that was pretty much it. I mean, a lot of it was physicality, but you can't knock David Benavidez's abilities at this point. Again, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And on the undercard, Jermall Charlo returned and he won most of the rounds against Jose Benavidez Jr. He didn't look great, but he actually looked a little sharper than I thought he was going to look. I thought that he had some defensive flaws. I wasn't used to seeing Jermall Charlo get hit that much. And, but he did put his punches together. He didn't get Jose Benavidez Jr. out of there, but for the layoff, he didn't look terrible. And if he's able to build on that and get sharper and continue to return to form, he could be viable. I don't know he was asked, where are you going to fight? And he didn't sound great, man. After the fight, like, not that he sounded punch drunk, but I don't know where he said very little after the fight. And even when asked where you're going to campaign, he said, this is the division. I mean, what division is this when it's a catch weight that you miss? You know what I mean? Like, so I'm not sure. I'm still not sure. After Brian Campbell won half of Morning Combat, I mean, was this whole broadcast a little bit weird, a little bit different? I mean, by the way, if you want to hear some good commentary, listen to Breadman and Luke Thomas on the pre-pay-per-view card, where they had like Sergey Lipinets and Michelle Rivera, those fights. Listen to the in-between boxing discussions between Breadman and Luke Thomas. That was actually a really cool pairing. And I hope that they're able to do that wherever after this whole Showtime exit from boxing. But on the broadcast, I still wasn't sure who was doing the commentary. Like, I never saw the commentators. They never showed them. And it's, to me, let me know if your pay-per-view broadcast was different, but there was no second commentator. Like, there was just the one guy calling the play-by-play who sounded like he was changing his voice like 4 different times. My brother, who I was watching the fight with family, but he was mentioning, like, we were joking about the commentary and how it seemed like it was almost like a post-apocalyptic broadcast because of how sparse the commentary was. It certainly wasn't that 3-man team that you're used to, where you've got the play-by-play guy, you've got the non-boxer analyst, and then you've got the boxer analyst or a former trainer, something like that, you know? This was none of that. This was just one guy who was sounding dramatic at times, sound overworked at other times. I just don't know what was up with that broadcast. I don't know if they've already kind of cleaned out, you know, staff-wise, to where they were working with a limited crew for this last pay-per-view, but it wasn't a great broadcast. There just wasn't enough commentary. They weren't throwing it to interviews between fights. At least, again, on what I was watching, that's what I was seeing. Like, they would show the ring from far away sometimes for like a few minutes, rather than like going upstairs to, I don't know, Brian Custer, or if it was ESPN for a while, Max Kellerman, or, you know, where they would have like a former fighter or somebody who's got an upcoming fight, you know, at the booth interviewing, you know, between fights, something like that. No, they didn't really have any of that. But Jermall Charlo sounded, you know, kind of, I don't know where he's going to be fighting, 160, 168. Is he going to keep on doing catch weights? But he looked pretty good. He obviously wasn't prime Jermall Charlo, but he looked pretty good. And he started to tighten up. He started to kind of brawl a little bit when he had to, but his jab, which has always been kind of his money punch, his jab and the timing of his counters have always been beautiful. And the sharper that those things get, the better it's going to be for Jermall Charlo. Subriel Matias just works over Ergashev. I was wrong about this one. I thought Ergashev's athleticism was going to give Matias problems. Matias is a problem. And I don't know if this style is going to eventually catch up with him, but I mean, the volume wise, like this wasn't that close of a fight. Like, he started to, you know, grab the reins and to do Subriel Matias like things pretty early in this one, and he ends up stopping Ergashev. I hope that they could get a big fight for him, whether it's a unification fight against another belt holder, Raleigh Romero, or I don't know if they're going to have Raleigh fight the winner of O'Hara Davies versus Ishmael Barroso. That's one of the belts, and that's the belt that Alberto Puello used to hold for just a moment. And then there's the WBC belt, which is going to be up for grabs as Prograis defends it against Devin Haney in a few weeks. And then there's Teofimo Lopez's WBO belt, which he just won off of Josh Taylor. I hope that there's something big for Subriel Matias in the coming months, because he's active and he's fighting a bunch of guys that, you know, people don't really know about, but he's fighting some tough guys like Jukimbayev. Ananyan fought him twice, stopped him the second time, lost via decision in the first time. And now Ergashev, his mandatory, who a lot of people thought was going to be a live one, even though way more people thought Matias was going to handle business. Again, I thought that we were going to be surprised by Ergashev's athleticism and how that was going to impact the fight. But I was wrong on that one. Lamont Rose Jr. beats Hector Garcia to claim the WBA 130-pound title. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Benavidez versus Andrade, and on the undercard as well in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.